if you reach a point where the citizens of a country are openly talking essentially about rising up and beating people up or watching other people beat people up to get their political way, you have to wonder if this is the beginning of the end of civilization. And here to discuss is Dr. Ashley Frawley, Senior Lecturer in Sociology and Social Policy at Swansea Uni. Nice to talk to you.
Hi there. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Is this the beginning of the end? Shall I grab myself some weapons and prepare myself for riots and such like?
Yeah, no. It's funny that you would think that might happen. I mean, you're British.
That's true. Well, no. To be absolutely fair, we have had one MP who was murdered by a right-wing extremist. So that's actually happened. We've had an MP murdered. And bearing in mind that that's there and people are openly talking about the citizens of the country, and instead of saying we need to calm things down, they're actually openly saying, well, we kind of don't mind the violence.
They're not really saying that. So if you actually have a look at this survey, you have to kind of wonder what agenda they had when they were setting up these questions, because they were not asked whether violence against MPs was a price worth paying. They were asked about a number of potential consequences of Brexit, including violence directed towards members of Parliament, and they had 3 potential responses, one of which was unrealistic. I want this to happen regardless of Brexit. And the other 2 were quite clearly pro-Brexit versus quite clearly pro-Remain. And it said, I see it as a risk, but it's worth it to take back control, versus leaving the EU is not worth the risk of this happening. So if you didn't think it was likely to happen, you couldn't state that. You had to choose one of the options. So particularly if you're in favor of Brexit, you're obviously going to pick the pro-Brexit option. So it's very easy to paint Brexiters as like these pitchfork-wielding maniacs. But actually, it was the question's very, very skewed towards, and you had to choose that. So if you didn't think that the risk was particularly likely, you were forced to pick one of the responses. You couldn't just outright state that.
You can't help but wonder with the use of such surveying techniques. I mean, I was actually thinking about referenda as well, because of course Hitler was famous for using a referenda to achieve otherwise seemingly unattainable political goals by reducing extremely complex issues to narrow binary choices. We live in a world then where even the information that we're told about how we feel about things is skewed by such studies.
Yeah, I mean, but like everybody else has a mind like I do, and it's quite easy to go and have a look and think and just think it's a little bit much to be. So as soon as I saw that 70% of people are in favor of violence against MPs, I thought no.
Yeah, but most people though won't be bothered to go and look online. They'll be on their phones looking at Tinder or whatever, or surfing the web. They're not going to be. They don't seem to be that bothered about checking such facts, which is why I think fake news flourishes.
Yeah, but it's also the job of people like me to come on to radio shows like this and kind of say, take the time to look through it. And in a robust democracy, that's what we do. I wouldn't say that we shouldn't have these kinds of surveys, but I actually think that it's a real problem, actually, these kinds of surveys, because they use so-called science to shut down debate. So my science says blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is a silly kind of survey, right? But you hear this kind of thing all the time. Science says X, ergo no more debate. Well, no, even so-called science, it's done by people who formulate particular questions, who have a particular outlook on an issue, and are seeking to find evidence to prove that point. And they do that, but they use the so-called science to shut down debate and say, no, I'm like godlike, priest-like. I've got access to the truth that you haven't got. Well, that's actually quite bad for a democracy. We need to be able to debate these things and to question. When people say the science says blah blah blah. No, it's skewed and you've got a bone to pick.
Here's Jenny Trent Hughes for you.
I mean, I absolutely back up what she's saying, because over the years I've been approached by many companies and organizations, and they say, we want everybody to know X, Y, Z. Write the questions for a survey that will give us that answer. Yeah. So never pay any attention to the survey.
Right? Is that right? So they work backwards.
They work absolutely. It works backwards. And so when you're going to look at a survey, you want to know exactly what the questions are, and you want to know how many people were asked, because they'll ask 25 people in an office and then go on the news and say 79% of the country believes X, Y, Z, and no, it's 16 people in accounting.
A famous survey about the percentage of Jewish people that felt they should leave Britain because of Jeremy Corbyn, and the sample size was so tiny that when you extrapolate that size, 75% of British Jews feel unsafe over Corbyn, and they spoke to like 20 people or 50 people. It's
exactly.
These
and then,
things,
of course, journalists get
absolutely, and everybody, and then passions are inflamed.
And it's dangerous. I mean, on a subject like
all
this,
this said,
it's dangerous.
Ashley,
the great thing about science, though, and why it was such a revolutionary force in modern society is because, before we had science, it was like the priests came down and they said, look, this is what God said, and you have to do it because God said so, and I have access to this special book, which is in Latin, and you don't. And then, Newton said, no, look, I'm going to do this thing, and you can do it too, and I can show you how I did it, and you do it, and that's how we decide that this is probably the correct thing. So I think that actually science is being used as a tool in the way that religion was used in the past.
Yes,
and in a healthy
absolutely.
democracy, we all need to be able to debate things. And I really don't like we're shutting down a lot of democratic debate by saying there's no debate here. The science has spoken. When it comes to society, you can be very, very sure that the science has not spoken because society is always changing. It's very difficult to disentangle cause and effect when it comes to human beings. So I think if there's any sort of message here, it's be critical, and when someone says the science has spoken, say, well, no.
Well, but then during the, bring it back to the B word, during the Brexit debates leading to the referendum, one of the things that I was most struck by was how experts who used to be held in high regard by society, the most learned people on the country on a variety of issues, suddenly experts, you're an expert, you might as well be a Satanist. I mean, it's, oh my God, it's an expert. We don't want to hear from you. And even then, that's when I started wondering, that's when the seed started hatching. Is this the beginning of the end of civilization? When the ordinary people turn on the experts, on their guides, on the wise ones, is this not the beginning of the end?
No, I think that's quite healthy. That's quite healthy. Whatever happened to any cook can govern. When Brexit was, first being, when Brexit, after the referendum, everyone was sort of debating on Facebook or on social media, and people were saying, "Oh, look at all these people! Suddenly, everybody is an expert in politics."
Yeah.
Well, yes, they are.
Yes,
they are.
Politics is people. I have to say, Ashley, I think your students at Swansea University are probably very lucky to have you. Dr. Ashley Frawley there, Senior Lecturer in Sociology and Social Policy down at Swansea. Absolutely fascinating, isn't it? Was me thinking on the way home I need to get myself a big stick to fight off the marauding hordes. And actually, I'm absolutely fine. Here's Rachel Jewell with the half-hour headlines.